Repeater's codename comes from the slang term repeating mechanism from an automatic weapon, and that's the least nerdy thing that you'll find in this review. Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe tour review. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the G.I. Joe's Steadi-Cam machine gunner, the 1988 Repeater. Like a lot of 1987 and 1988 characters, he doesn't make any cartoon appearances, but he makes his first comic book appearance in the old Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 82. Taking a look at Repeater's accessories first, we have what the contents list on the card calls an electromechanical machine gun. Normally the contents list actually does have a designation or caliber, but there's nothing for this, which made it a bit difficult to find out whether there was a real-world equivalent to Repeater's machine gun. The closest I could find was this, a Japanese HO-155 Model 2 machine gun. Now, it's probably not what this thing was based on, but the resemblance is uncanny. You'll have to excuse the poor quality photo that I've used as a comparison here, but the Japanese stopped making this particular machine gun in 1945 for some reason. Next, we have what the contents list calls a body mount. It was attached to the figure by this peg down here, and the machine gun is attached by this peg here. And while this looks a little bit strange, it is very close to what a Steadi-Cam usually is. Something which is hooked onto the person, and you have weights and all sorts of other moving fulcrums and things like that. It's also attached to his belt by this permanent little hole. And finally, he comes with a backpack. A fairly standard looking affair. I would have thought that there would have been molded on ammo or something like that, but no, it's just pouches. The card back does have a little instruction piece here, assuming you haven't ripped the card out and completely obscured the instructions. But it's also fairly easy just to place this thing on the figure. I'll just place the peg on this little mount there, and place the machine gun. It has a hole right there on there, and that's fine. The body mount only swivels in this axis, and the machine gun only swivels in this axis. But together, it covers quite a range, even when the figure isn't holding onto the thing, which I find fairly interesting. But unfortunately, it does seem to have one flaw, and that the peg is so close onto the body mount that the rear handle is obscured for quite a range here. As a matter of fact, you almost have to be pointing it straight downwards in order for the hand to get in there. Anywhere else, and the hand really just can't grip onto that rear end. Not that it really matters. I mean, you can always fake that portion, and if you really want the figure to be holding onto it, the foregrip is easy enough to hold onto. At least I'm assuming that's a foregrip and not something else, but I don't know what else it could be really. And one very interesting thing about having this thing being able to swing around on the figure is you can swing it all the way backwards like this, and then have the machine gun actually pointing straight up, and it's kind of up and out of the way of the figure. I'll just put the backpack back on him, actually, just to prove that it's not in the way of the backpack either. But it's a nice way of storing the figure, especially if you have him in a display where he's not actually shooting at anything. If you don't like the whole body mount Steadi-Cam function of the machine gun, as you can see, Repeater can definitely hold the gun just by itself. As a matter of fact, he actually holds it better as a two-hand grip without the body mount. The fact that the handle is too close to the body mount isn't the only problem that I have with the machine gun. It's also the fact that there doesn't seem to be any ammunition for it. There's none molded onto his backpack, there's none molded onto the figure, and then there's this rather large hole here. As a matter of fact, it's so large that one could argue that it's probably part of the design, and maybe the ammunition actually attaches somewhere else. But it's just so obvious a hole, like it should have been a plug hole for maybe an ammunition box or an ammunition belt. It's just rather unfortunate that we don't get anything like that. One very interesting thing is what they've molded in here. Now this little detail that seems to flow into his pocket, it's really just attached to the body mount itself. And Steadi-Cams, being an electrical device, I tend to think of this as a battery pack perhaps. So that's not ammunition feeding into it, because the actual machine gun would be kind of way out here. So, I mean, obviously you can just sort of fashion something else to plug in there, which is kind of what I have done. I've taken an old 1990 Saw Viper machine gun belt, which was in terrible condition. It was kind of, well, breaking up on both ends. And I've made it so that it's skinny enough to actually put in here. So you just put that in there, and personally, I think this looks great. It should have come like this to begin with, but what are you going to do? Again, while the contents list on the card didn't actually call this machine gun any particular name or give it a caliber or ammunition range, it is very interesting that G.I. Joe Special Missions number 19 actually shows Repeater using it with that big old hole in the middle there and no ammunition box or belt to be seen, but he does explain the ammunition being used in it, which is kind of unusual because I think that's the first time we actually get more of an explanation out of the comic book than we do out of the contents list or of the file card. If you're looking for variations on the figure, actually a lot of 1988 and 1989 figures actually have the very same type of variation. And one of them is on the figure, whereas some figures are made in Hong Kong and some of them are made in China. Other than that, their figures look very, very similar, and there's no difference in color or sculpting. The other variation is, of course, in the file card, because 1988 file cards have a serial number which is purely numbers. However, when it was re-released in 1989, like mine, they started interjecting letters into it. I know there's a lot of people who really don't like Repeater's face sculpt with his manly man jaw and his jutting chin, but I think those are facial features which really emphasize his strength, both physically and as a character as well. There was no G.I. Joe cartoon in 1988, and Repeater made very few appearances in the comic book, so where does this love come from? Well, apparently it comes from all the licensed material. Check out all this licensed material which has Repeater on it, or has Repeater as the emphasis, straight in the middle of a whole bunch of other G.I. Joes from 88 or 89. And with his big chin, he kind of reminds me of Duke. Yes, it looks like Hasbro was gearing up Repeater to be the new Duke. And when this guy has almost 20 years in the army, he certainly has the experience to match. One very interesting thing is that he does have that one glove here. And while the fingerless gloves suggest that this is a shooting glove, I would actually probably think that this is actually closer to a barrel changing glove, because this is the hand which has to hold on to an area of the machine gun, like right here, which is fairly close to the barrel. So I'm thinking that he might actually hold on to the barrel as well here, if he wants even more stability than holding on to this piece. And one of the very interesting additions to the figure's sculpt is what's on his hat here. He has a little tab above what looks like airborne wings. And while it's obviously the sculpt can't be really that good on such an old and small figure, on the card art we know exactly what that is. It's his Ranger tab above the airborne wings. One very interesting thing about the file card is that it doesn't actually mention him being a Ranger. And while a lot of the G.I. Joes are Ranger qualified, not many are actually Rangers themselves. I mean, Stalker being one of the most prominent, and I think Sneak Peek was also a Ranger as well. But it doesn't say anything about him being a Ranger, and if he's wearing the tab, I would say that he's probably more than just Ranger qualified. He's probably a Ranger himself. As much as I like Repeater, and as well loved as he is by the general G.I. Joe collecting community, as a G.I. Joe machine gunner, he will always be overshadowed by guys like Roadblock, and of course the very first G.I. Joe machine gunner, Rock and Roll. And while Repeater was meant to replace Roadblock on the toy shelves, it seems a little bit odd that the following year, he is replaced by Rock and Roll. Now, I say very strange because, well, as a 1988 figure, Repeater would be re-released in 1989, sharing shelf space with the 1989 to 1990 version 2 Rock and Roll. And look at that, their color schemes are very similar. So similar, in fact, that whoever was doing the micro figure collection actually confused the two and sort of melded them into one. On the aftermarket, Repeater is a very easy figure to find, complete with all of his accessories unbroken. As a matter of fact, I think that he was highly produced, simply because Hasbro wanted him to be the next Duke, or the next headliner for that series year. And as a result of him being kind of common, he is also fairly cheap as well. You shouldn't really have to overpay for this guy. The only thing that you really do have to look out for is whether or not he is discolored. Because like a lot of the light plastics that Hasbro used, tans, light greens, light blues, whites, they tend to discolor really easily. Unfortunately, Repeater here is mostly tan and light green. So the higher you go in the mid-range, Roadblock, of course. Despite what I said about the accessories, I think they do really go very well with this. Whoops. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.